recording. And with that, I'd like to welcome Mike Cooperberg, Executive Director of the U.S. Global Change Research Program, to this meeting to give us an overview on USGCRP and its mandates, its workings, and what its role is in global change and climate change efforts within the federal government. So, Mike.
Stephen, thank you very much. Good morning, committee members. Really glad to have you here. Thank you very much for taking the time and spending time with us. What the reason we're doing this today is that we feel really strongly that you'll give us better advice if you have a better understanding of who we are, what we do, and importantly, what we don't do or what we can't do. So that was the whole intent here. Some of you, this is going to be second nature to you. You're going to have heard it before, and I look forward to the questions at the end. I will try to go through this efficiently, and so we have plenty of time at the end to discuss and ask questions. So, the U.S. Global Change Research Program, and I'm going to start at the top. Who are we, where we are, and to do that, he says confidently, to do that, okay. You start with the Executive Office of the President, and you'll notice here in the middle of all these offices, I've put the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Other people might organize this figure differently, but OSTP is one of many offices within the Executive Office of the President, and you know many of these: the Office of Management and Budget, Council on Environmental Quality, National Security Council. Entities with responsibilities large and small across the federal government. OSTP was established in law by Congress in 1976, and I'm going to point out several things during this talk that were established in law, and it's important to know that the things that are established in law tend to be durable. They tend to exist until Congress does something to make them go away. So OSTP was established in law. It provides the president with advice on all things related to science and technology. Oftentimes, the director of OSTP is also titled as the President's Science Advisor. Those two titles don't necessarily go together, but they can and have in the past. And so this is what they do. They work across the federal government and across the nation on topics related to science and technology. Importantly, for this particular talk, OSTP chairs something called the National Science and Technology Council. NSTC is a cabinet-level council chaired by the president, in theory. In reality, the council is chaired by that chairpersonship is delegated from the president to the director of OSTP. OSTP then chairs the council, and representation is subsequently delegated. So you usually end up with undersecretaries or that sort of thing, DepSecs, representing an agency on NSTC. So, but very high level organization. In the Obama administration, I used to say that NSTC doesn't really exist. It's just a theoretical umbrella under which a bunch of things happen. In the Trump administration, it was interesting. NSTC actually met. It was a really interesting, and it was a bunch of really high level agency representatives from across the agency, talking about things that were important to them. In the Biden administration, NSTC again did not meet. So it's really interesting, but the organization exists, and the reason I'm going into all this is because within that organization are a number of committees, one of which is called the Committee on Environment. The Committee on Environment works on environmental issues across Earth obs, climate change, Arctic, ocean sciences, and there are a number of subcommittees within the Committee on Environment. And if you look down through this list at the bottom, you see the Subcommittee on Global Change Research and the Subcommittee on Climate Services. It's like, that's the point. It's like, why is he talking about all this stuff? The point is, one of the things it took me a long time to figure out, I never really asked the question of the subcommittee of what? Well, the Subcommittee on Global Change Research is a subcommittee of the Committee on Environment within the National Science and Technology Council under the Office of Science and Technology Policy, reporting to the president. So there you go. That's your 101 in federal organizational bureaucracy today. So the two subcommittees I mentioned, the Subcommittee on Global Change Research and the newer Subcommittee on Climate Services, are composed of, we call them principals of representatives from the 15 federal agencies that are named in the Global Change Research Act of 1990. These subcommittees act as boards of directors. That's the easiest way to think of them. Is the U.S. Global Change Research Program is a company. Think of it as a company. It has, in this case, two boards of directors, which provide sort of strategic direction and guidance to the program, to the U.S. Global Change Research Program, and then the program implements that strategic guidance and advice. Here's the list of the 15 agencies. You'll notice if you read, if you can decipher federal logos, that these agencies range from the pure science agencies like the National Science Foundation, NASA, Smithsonian, to the other end of the spectrum, agencies that really are not science agencies like Transportation, HUD, U.S. Agency for International Development, State Department, those agencies that are really sort of consumers of the science that comes out of the Global Change Research Program. And in the middle, you have a bunch of agencies that have both strong science components and sort of specific mission areas like energy, agriculture, interior, EPA. I've probably missed somebody near Health and Human Services. So these 15 agencies were identified in the law. And the idea is that the agencies that are spending money on global change research are being informed by the agencies that need the results of that global change research. Everybody's at the same table, hopefully coordinating the investments and making sure they're responsive to the needs of the nation. So what is USGCRP? So I'm finally getting to the point here. USGCRP, and this language on the left in blue, this is sort of what captures what we're doing. This comes out of the law, and it tells us that our job is to assist the nation and the world to understand, assess, predict, and respond to human-induced and natural processes of global change. So in a nutshell, that's what USGCRP's job is. That law that created us was signed in 1990 by President Bush. The program actually existed as a presidential initiative under President Reagan. So we've been around for a long time, 34 years since the signing of the act, actually 34 years a couple of months ago. We just celebrated another anniversary. We ask all the agencies how much money they spend on global change research. We get responses from, I should know this, 6 or 8 of the agencies. A number of the agencies say we don't do global change research, but those 6 or 8 agencies total $4.2 billion in 2023. And I'll give you a secret here. The number for fiscal year 24 that has not been released publicly is 4.0. It was down slightly. If you call $200 million slightly in federal terms, it was down slightly. The explanation I've gotten for that reduction is that there was so much money floating around in BIL, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the Inflation Reduction Act, that Congress felt that the science agencies were getting a lot of money through other mechanisms, and maybe they weren't quite funded quite as strongly as they had been in the past. I don't know if that's actually what the thinking was or not. But USGCRP is led by these 2 subcommittees, this SGCR, Subcommittee on Global Change Research, and the Subcommittee on Climate Services, or SCS. And their job is to coordinate climate change research and climate services across the government. Coordinate, not do it. We don't do research. We don't fund research. Our job is to coordinate the research that these agencies do. The Act identified 11 agencies. The Act also gave us the ability to add other agencies and departments. So since that time, we've added 4 agencies. Smithsonian and USAID were added long enough ago that we don't know exactly when that happened. When we started to add new agencies in recent years, we went back looking for how did they do this, and we couldn't even find the record of exactly how that had happened. So those 2 agencies have been around for a long time. In 2023, we added DHS/FEMA and Housing and Urban Development. So we're happy to have those real strong consumers at the table. So those agencies are the ones who put representatives on our board of directors, and so they have sort of the authority in the USGCRP. However, almost everything else we do is open to any federal agency or any federal employee. So in particular, our interagency groups membership in our interagency groups is not limited to only the named agencies. So everything I've been talking about for the last 10 minutes or so is captured here. National Science Technology Council, its Committee on Environment, 2 subcommittees overseeing U.S. Global Change Research Program and its interagency groups. I'm going to talk more about those in a bit. And I will note that the yellow box here in the USGCRP federal leadership currently refers to 5 of us. That's myself, Stacy Aguilera-Peterson, who's the Deputy Director for Research, Heidi Roop, who's the Deputy Director for Services, and the directors of our 2 assessments, Ariela Zeikerman, the National Climate Assessment Director, and Phil Levin, the National Nature Assessment Director. So the 4 of us collectively are sort of the federal brain trust that oversees USGCRP, takes direction from the 2 subcommittees, talks a lot to OSTP, and tries to get done what everybody wants to get done. I mentioned these budget numbers. This is what we get from the agencies each year. This is actually a table that comes out of our annual report to Congress. I'll mention that a bit in a minute. But this breaks down by agency what the agency reports as global change research. And the reason we have to do this, the reason I'm stressing what the agency reports, is you can't open an agency's budget and say, hey, where's the global change research line? That's not the way this works. That's the whole point of why USGCRP exists, is because it is inherently, global change research is inherently a cross-cutting activity. NASA observes the Earth from space. NOAA has, ground airborne assets. Department of Energy has large computers, and so everybody has a piece of this puzzle. And this is where we try to put that puzzle together, at least financially, and ask the agencies. And what you'll see here is NASA being the big player. When NASA is asked about this, they report a fraction of the Earth observing satellite mission total costs. So that's a very, very big number. And it's warranted. But those satellite missions are critical to the kinds of work we do. But each agency decides on their own what numbers to report and where to put them. So this is, gives you a rundown on what each agency thinks they're doing in terms of global change research. A key part of the U.S. Global Change Research Program is the National Coordination Office. This is the name for the group of us, the 5 feds and 35 mostly contract employees. Right on the phone with us today, we have Julie Morris and Jennifer Starr, so representatives of that office. So the office exists to carry out the direction and the guidance and to support the activities of USGCRP. The program and its office has gotten bigger over the years. Quite proud of what we have and the staff we have. But this is a list of sort of the things that we do within the office. Everything from making sure that we have an office space, and the space is functional, operational, to coordination of the interagency groups. Each interagency groups has a coordinator, a person from the National Coordination Office who works closely with the group and its leadership to organize meetings, to schedule meetings, to take notes, to implement activities. So these groups often will do things like put on workshops or put out special reports, and that coordinator is a key person in all this. The coordination office also supports the subcommittees. Jennifer Starr is the executive secretary to the Subcommittee on Global Change Research. She has a counterpart, Dylan, who is the executive secretary to the Subcommittee on Climate Services. So we support those 2 subcommittees. We're the support staff. We're the interstitial tissue that tries to hold all of this together. So I mentioned interagency groups a number of times. This is the current list of our interagency groups. There are more than 1,000 federal individuals involved in these groups. And that doesn't mean if you divide, 18 groups by, 1,000, that each group has 175 people in every one of their meetings. However, on their lists of membership, it totals up to about 1,000 people. As any given time, you can obviously less of those people are involved at any one time, but we're touching a lot of people across the federal government and a lot of different interests, from the basic science folks to people involved in adaptation and resilience activities, to the social sciences, to international programs. It's a really, really interesting place, and it's where the coordination actually happens. When you actually talk about how do you physically coordinate things, each one of these topic areas represents an area where a group of federal employees gets together, talks about what their interests are, talks about what their plans are, where they're going, and that's the mechanism for this coordination. The interagency groups identified here in bold are ones that are new in the last 2 years. It's been a really interesting growth of the program. And I'll stop here to mention that these groups, we have groups that exist because they want to. In the past, USGCRP has tried to decide what groups we should have. There's be one on earth, one on wind, one on fire, whatever that organization should be. And it turns out it doesn't work very well when you try to tell people how to coordinate. What we've been doing is letting people that want to coordinate work together. So almost all these groups are grassroots. They came together, they put their arms around each other, and they said, there's a really interesting topic. We want to work together, and we want to do it under USGCRP. And when that happens, we wrap our arms around them, we say, welcome to the family, and off they go. And so, but as a result of that, we have a kind of an odd collection of interagency groups. You'll notice ones that are missing. We don't have one on oceans or ocean processes. We also don't have one on atmospheric processes. It's a really interesting thing because you'd think that oceans and atmosphere are really critically important to what USGCRP does, and it is. However, those particular groups, like for example, oceans, feels like they're really well coordinated. They have their own subcommittee, the subcommittee on ocean science and technology. So they have their own sort of partner subcommittee, and they feel like they're really well coordinated. And we feel like their coordination happens through that subcommittee. Arctic processes, similarly through IARPC, the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee, feels like they're very well coordinated that way, and it's just something that they don't need further coordination from us. So these are the groups. I did mention earlier that membership in these groups is open to any federal employee. And we have some contractors, some of the national lab folks participate in these things as well. I've got 3 pages here of material on each group. I'm not going to belabor this, but we have these groups, and a quick summary. I can provide these slides to you if you're interested, but it does give you a quick rundown on what each one of these groups is doing. The law directs USGCRP to do 3 things. It says a lot of things, but there are 3 products that it directs us to produce. One of those is an annual report to Congress. We call that report Our Changing Planet. It has come out annually since 1990, and something we're very proud of. The fiscal year 2025 report is the one that was due this year. We are struggling to get this thing finished and out. Keep your fingers crossed, but I hope in the next few weeks we get this thing out, because we need to get it out under this administration, because if we come to a new administration, it'll just be a really, really difficult thing to start all over again. And hey, us over here, we have an old report that gets cleared. So we want to get it out so we have it out and it's available to people. It does a couple things. It summarizes progress of the program over the past year. It has a forward-looking piece of where are we going. And importantly, it provides that budget table that I showed you earlier, how much money is being spent. This is what Congress asked for in the Act. So they get this annual report to Congress. The Act also directs us to create a strategic plan, a national global change research plan. It tells us that we should put out a 10-year plan, that we should revise it every 3 years. That's from the Act. We put a new decadal plan together in 2022, released it in late 2022. And at some point in the near future, we'll start working on an update to that. I think that personally, 3 years is kind of nuts. You never actually stop writing strategic plans, and there's never any time to implement them. So in the previous round, we had a 10-year plan and a 5-year. We put on an update in 5 years, and nobody seemed to complain about that. It seemed to work well. We'll see what happens, but at least in Mike's head, that's how we would do this. The plan is developed by members of the SGCR in close collaboration with the national academies. The law actually directs the national academies to be part of this, that we should consult with them in the development of the plan, and then ultimately when the plan is completed, they call it the National Research Council, the national academies should review the plan. And that's what we have done in the past and will continue to do. And it's actually sort of the reason why we have this committee. It's an important part of what the committee does. But obviously we use the committee for much more than just that. But that's sort of where the impetus for working with the National Academy comes from. The current plan has 4 pillars, and you're going to always see advancing science sort of, I think, at the center of what USGCRP does. Inherently and sort of organically, that's what we're about. But you see these other pieces: engaging the nation, informing decisions, collaborating internationally. This reflects both what the law tells us to do, but also what the nation seems to be demanding of the science community, not just to go in your ivory tower and do good science and publish it in high quality journals, but to actually work with people to understand their needs and to be responsive and to make sure that the science you produce can be as usable and used by the people who are looking for it and needing it. So it was a really kind of a big step forward for USGCRP to identify these activities and really say publicly that we're not just a bunch of pointy-headed academics doing science, but we recognize the needs of the nation and we want to respond to those needs. The third thing that the Act directs us to do is to create a national climate assessment. It tells us that not less frequently than every 4 years, we should put out an assessment that identifies the findings of the program. It should talk about what we've observed in global change, what we project in future global change, and the impacts of those observed and projected changes and it lists 8 sectors. I can't list the 8 sectors, but we can, energy, tourism, health, etc. To date, we've put out 5 NCAs, and if you're doing math in your head, 34 years, 5 NCAs. We have not always met the 4-year deadline. We've done much better in the past few years. I think NCA 4 came out 4 years after NCA 3. NCA 5 came out 5 years after NCA 4. NCA 6 is on schedule to be released within 4 years of NCA 5. So we're doing much better now than we did in the beginning. It took them a while to get moving and get going, but NCA 5 came out. We're very, very pleased with it, and we're working hard on NCA 6 now. We're also working on the first ever National Nature Assessment. You guys have heard about this in the past. Phil Levin, sorry, and I should have said Ariella Zeicherman is the lead for the National Climate Assessment. Phil Levin is the lead for the National Nature Assessment. This was something that was identified a couple of years ago as this was, one of the things that happened is Jane Lubchenco came to us and said, you're the Global Change Research Program, right? And we're like, yeah. She said, so why are you only doing climate? And, there was this sort of uncomfortable silence, like, I don't know. And so we had a long talk about what the Act meant about global change. And one of the outcomes of that is there's more that's changing around us than just climate. And the Act is clearly related to all those things that are changing. And so the National Nature Assessment is an outcome of those kinds of conversations. We're very, very pleased with this, recognizing that nature is changing around us in conjunction with climate change and, on its own and resulting from things that are not climate. So we're very interested in that. We've established a federal steering committee the same way we do the National Climate Assessment, and we're well along the way in putting this document together. The zero order draft or the annotated outline was released in the fall of this year, and the authors now responding to the input they've got. They'll put together a full first order draft. That'll be the next step. And when we get to the third order draft, it will come to the national academies for external peer review. I want to mention that the Act had a very strong expectation of international activities for USGCRP. And you'll recall that one of the 4 pillars in the strategic plan was the pillar around collaborating internationally. It's something we're very committed to and very proud of the work that we're doing. We work very closely on a number of fronts in USGCRP. We work with a number of partners. We fund 4 different international secretariats, and those secretariats provide sort of a window to the international community. We work with the World Climate Research Program, Future Earth, a group called START that works on capacity development in Africa, and the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research, IAI. So we use these 4 international secretariats as our window to the international world, work very closely with them. We also provide travel support for U.S. scientists, non-federal U.S. scientists, who are selected to be authors on a number of international assessments, IPCC being a key one of those. So if you're selected by the IPCC to be an author and you're academic, you're non-fed, we'll provide the travel support to get you to the meetings, the author meetings that will typically held all around the world. We've also recently, with the AR7 cycle of IPCC, we have put together a technical support unit, a group of people that are supporting a working group. So the United States co-chairs Working Group 3. Kate Calvin from NASA is the co-chair of Working Group 3. And as the developed country co-chair, the expectation is that we'll also provide a technical support unit. So we have a staff of 4.5 people in our office, a number of people at the NOAA TSU in Asheville, and there's a corresponding group in Malaysia. The developing nations contribution to this is also to provide some staff. And so there's a fairly large group of people that are coordinating Working Group 3. USGCRP is right in the middle of that. That's our international piece. I mentioned the National Academies. You guys are a very important part of what we do. More than once, people say, "Oh yeah, well, says who?" It's like, well, the National Academy reviewed our report, and I don't know how you could do better than that. It's we see the National Academies as the gold standard for science, scientific integrity, and if you want a really thorough, really defensible report or review of one of your reports, the National Academies is the way to go. So we rely on you for not only that external peer review, but also for the critical advice you provide to us and the program on a wide range of topics. So finally, I want to mention some recent topics of interest, some really interesting things that's going on. So there's been a lot of interest from previously non-member agencies. I mentioned DHS and HUD joining in 2023. That was, these agencies came to us. This was not us out with a tin cup, but it's actually those agencies coming to us saying, we'd really like to be part of USGCRP. We're really excited to see that because I think more and more these agencies that consume science, having them at the table and having them provide input to the science agencies is critical. I mentioned the National Nature Assessment and our expansion or recognition of our responsibility for a full global change research responsibilities. I mentioned a little bit about climate services. I'd like to talk more about them here. Climate information and climate services is critically important. I think we have really good science and we'll continue to push and advance that science. But until that science is available to people, translated into forms they need, and sort of the consumers are educated around it, we're not going to solve the problems that we have. And so we're very, very excited about efforts that we put in place to work on climate information. Climate information, meaning, for example, taking the CMIP archive and making the information, the wonderful information that's captured in there, is not accessible to mortal human beings. I've tried. Rather, what we're trying to do with the activity called CRIS is to fix it so that anybody can see what they want to see for example, out of the CMIP archive. So you could easily produce the kinds of maps that we put in the National Climate Assessment that show changes in temperature or precipitation or soil moisture over time at any given time frame, any given scenario. That information should be available to everyone and not just what you find in the National Climate Assessment, for example. So we're very excited about CRIS. CAMERA, the climate mapping for resilience and adaptation tool, is something that was put together to inform investments from BIL, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. As we spent billions of dollars with BIL, there were people in the White House saying, let's not build our new infrastructure to old standards. Let's provide information so that people can use forward-looking information as they plan and make their infrastructure investments. So CAMERA actually took downscaled climate information from NCA 4 and put it in a place that tied it to BIL online, CMRA. So you can find CAMERA. If you Google CMRA and NOAA hosts the site, you can find that tool. And we're very, very proud of it. We're proud that it's there, but we're also proud that it's because of the work we did on NCA 4 that information is available. It's being updated now with the information from NCA 5, which is CMIP 6 data. Very excited about that. So all these tools, these are ways that USGCRP is getting in the middle of things and trying to help make the scientific information coming out of the program accessible and available to people across the country. We also recognize that the raw information is not the end product here. It's not just enough to put good information in a web portal and hope people find it. But climate services, much like the weather service, climate services is a comprehensive activity effort to make sure that people not only have access to the information, but they understand what it is, they know when to use it, they know when not to use it, they know what uncertainties are. All these sort of things is what we see in climate services. I mentioned that we had a second subcommittee, a second board of directors, the Subcommittee on Climate Services, and that group is focused on coordination of climate services across the federal government. The last piece here in this topic is greenhouse gas monitoring. This is something, the fairly recent addition to our interagency groups is a group on greenhouse gases and their measurements. Very, very interesting topic because ultimately you can't manage what you don't measure. And while we are doing measurements in a lot of places in a lot of different ways of greenhouse gases, there's no place you can go to say, give me a good look at the federal government's measurements of greenhouse gases across topics. So we're working very hard on trying to not only improve the measurements that we're making, but to fix it so that you can get access to those actual measured information pieces across the federal government. The last thing I want to talk about is climate security. Really fascinating topic. The intelligence community and the national security communities have been very, very interested in climate change and what it means for them. These groups are fascinating because if you tell them there's a threat driver, that some changes are provide a threat that the United States needs to be aware of, they tend to say, tell us more. And unfortunately, the way you have those conversations, and many of you may know this from your work with the roundtable, is those conversations tend to happen in SCIFs, in classified spaces, which makes it difficult. It means that everybody has the conversation, has to have security clearances, but a number of us from USGCRP and OSTP have those clearances and have been able to have ongoing conversations with the intelligence community. And it's been really, really fascinating and rewarding to talk to a bunch of really smart people that recognize threats when they see them, but don't understand what climate change is and where the information is and what it means to them. So we've been able to be a bridge in helping those. We also have a new interagency group on national security. This is a group that's working in unclassified space to connect the science agencies and the national security and intelligence community groups to talk about these topics. So lots of really good, interesting things going on there. Okay, I got close to 30 minutes, Stephen. So with that, let me say thanks. I will stop sharing and love to have a conversation with you.